stopped that whole thing and went to do something that was, definitely not normal as far as being 30 years old and having a wife and a kid kind of thing.
That was Duran talking about what it's like for him quitting a stable day job to go all in on guiding. Duran shares a really unique and refreshing perspective in today's episode of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. We are on episode number 22.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Before we get into the content today, I want to remind you to follow us on Instagram at instagram.com/wetflyswing. In today's episode, I interviewed Duran Torrez, who is a new guide and someone who has an amazing perspective on what it takes to go all in on your passion. Duran tells the story of what it took him to leave a stable career as a teacher and assistant principal to running a full-time guiding business. He talks about the hardest part of guiding, mindset, and why he feels the switch rod is the perfect outfit for his home Steelhead River. Don't miss this show as Duran talks about why he has a gardening section on his blog at schoolofchrome.com and how he learned to spay cast on a section of river adjacent to the most radioactive area in the U.S. That's no joke. So, without further ado, here's Duran Torrez. How's it going, Duran?
It's going good.
Nice. Good to have you on the show. I think we connected at the Sportsman Show back in, February?
Yeah, we were. I was down there in Portland, and it was my first time there tying some flies, and you came by and talked a little bit, and now we're here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it always takes a little bit of time to put these things together, but appreciate you coming on here. And I was going to get into a few things. I know you've been guiding over on the Kilickitat, and I'm not sure what other rivers you've been on, but I was hoping to talk a little bit about your history and maybe just get a feel for what it's like, as a new guide in an area and kind of that whole experience, because I know there's a number of people that listen to this show that are interested in that. But I think you probably can provide a bunch of tips for people that want to catch some more steelhead as well.
Oh yeah, it just kind of depends on how deep you want to get into the story. I primarily fish the Kilickitat. I fish a little bit of the Yakima River down here where it comes into the Columbia right there at the mouth for bass fishing. But
cool.
As far as steelhead goes, I fish the Kilickitat. I venture out into, I go to Forks and fish the peninsula and do some of that stuff just personally. But as far as guiding goes, It's just the Kilickitat. I've been fishing that river since I was a little baby. My dad has pictures. My dad and mom have pictures of me underneath the bow of the boat taking a nap when I'm super small, you know what I mean?
Nice.
And so it's just been like growing up on the river, and it's only been till the last years when I started guiding there. So, but cool. A lot of experiences on it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how did you? So from that period there when you were a baby under the bow of the boat, how did you kind of get fully into fly fishing and steelhead and into guiding? How'd that all come to be?
Oh man, so I guess it was a pretty natural progression of steelhead fishing. First starting when my dad learned how to fish there, fishing in a drift boat, back trolling plugs, back trolling sand shrimp. And that's primarily what we did. Did a lot of back trolling, let the lines out, get the fish when it gets on. And that's how I kind of learned to read water. Mm-hmm. And then when I got old enough to do some casting, so, I was probably maybe really 10 or 12 years old when I got old enough to actually, cast a bigger rod, that I learned how to drift fish. And just like traditional style drift fishing with slinkies and lead weights and rubber and that kind of stuff. And I started tying a few flies for that. And so I kind of learned that way. And through the back trolling for sand shrimp or with sand shrimp and plugs and through the drift fishing, we were catching some pretty big trout on the Kilickitat, and so then my dad, he had always wanted to start fly fishing. So we're like, well, hey, there's some big trout in here. Let's start fly fishing. And so, that's kind of how we got into it. I think I was probably, 10 or 12 once I started getting into that fly fishing game. And then, I just did the trout stuff. It was kind of like your beginning progression of fishing where I I just wanted to catch a fish on a fly rod, and it didn't matter what size it was. My dad tells me, I used to spend hours in like the little side pools where the little smolt and stuff are, with the tiniest fly, just trying to get something going with those things. And then I remember spending a lot of time in just little riffles and stuff and catching, 8-10 inch trout and having a blast, catching a bunch of them. And I did that for a long time. And then, on accident one time, I never really got into the real specific trout game of fly fishing with matching the hatch on everything and knowing a ton about insects and their life stages and all of that. I primarily fished woolly boogers with a little bead head on it, just because I knew that caught a lot of fish. And one time on accident, I hooked a steelhead on my 5-weight, and luckily I got it landed. It was about 5 pounds, but then as soon as I did that, I was like, oh man, this is a thing. This is a thing. And so from there, it kind of just took off, into specifically trying to target bigger trout and steelhead, and I left all the small trout behind and kind of went on my way that way.
Cool. And now you're fully into it. How has it been now that you've had a year or so under your belt guiding on the kilickitat? I mean, what's that experience been like for the first year? I mean, I know that the one thing I hear, I've talked to a lot of guides and people in the industry, and one of the take-home messages is that you definitely don't get into this business, or into fly fishing, the fly fishing business for the money. How has it been for you? I mean, what's it been like?
It's been an awesome experience, because to kind of go back a couple of steps, I was a teacher. I was a teacher for, I think 5 or 6 years, if I can remember right, an 8th grade science teacher. And then I was an assistant principal at an elementary school for a couple of years. And then I stopped.
Wow.
And I started guiding, right? I've always wanted to guide in the summertime, but I didn't want to, through the effort that it was going to take to get started, I didn't want to just use my few months in the summer to work more. I wanted to fish on my own, right? But the starting of the guiding thing was more about sharing what I knew from all of the years of fishing, on the kilickitat with other people, as opposed to, I'm not going to try to travel around the Northwest and fish 300 days a year to try to make a bunch of money.
Right.
That's not the point of it. And so really the takeaway from my first year on it was really solidifying what I was bringing to the table and what I was offering to people, and being okay with, this is my plan. This is what I'm offering. This is what I can do. And if you want something else in your experience, then I might not be the person for you, And so really, like I said, really getting my foundation of what I believed in and what I wanted to happen with the guiding, in place.
Cool. Cool. And what do you feel like is your, if you had to tell somebody, what you offer, how you're different than the next guy that's on the river, what would you tell those people?
I would tell them, first and foremost, I am about teaching. I'm about teaching. And so, if you want to come, and it doesn't matter, honestly, it doesn't matter if you want to learn how to back troll or if you want to, learn how to drift fish, since I've done it all. I'm about teaching people and getting them excited and going into steelhead fishing. And it doesn't have to be specifically fly fishing. I personally love fly fishing, and that's what I do on my own. So that's why I have that route as well. But I have a lot of friends that do other types of fishing, and I'm okay with teaching them that way too. But it's not about getting the fish, or it's not about you listening to me give a bunch of instructions and you having to put the cast in a certain spot, and the ultimate goal is to get a fish on the bank. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to give you the tools so that, you go out the next time and you're able to at least be somewhat successful. And that's different in the trout game, and that's different in the bass game, because steelhead fishing, if you're not where the fish are at, or you don't know how to get to where they're at or find where they're at, you're not in the game. The chances of you actually getting to hook a fish are so low. You need some assistance. A lot of people need some assistance just getting that started of, what should I use? how should I present it? Where should I look for these fish? And that's kind of what I'm doing, because, people aren't going to go out with a guide every single time they want to go fish. People are going out on their own. A lot of times they don't have a boat. A lot of times, they're waiting, going from the bank, finding different spots that way. And so it's really giving them the skills so that they can go do that on their own, just because, I love it that much.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. For sure. What do you think are a few of the challenges of the biggest challenges of being a guide or being a new guide?
I think the number one biggest challenge is clear expectations and communication with people. And that doesn't even that's not even anything to do with the actual fishing on the river.
Yeah.
There's challenges with that, but it's really, clear communication and expectations about what can happen when you're steelhead fishing, and a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot. There's a handful of people that have a lot bigger expectations because they're going with a quote guide,
right? Right.
And I consider myself a guide just because I've spent a little bit more time on the river than some people. Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert by any means, and I don't think anybody is. Everybody just has more or less time on the river than other people, and so you have more of that natural experience in a certain field, and that can be from fishing to anything. And so that's that clear expectation is probably a big one. And then once you kind of get over that, when I was just fishing in Forks just a month ago, I had one of the guys that the guide that I actually went with for one day, he told me, I've never heard it before, because he was talking about the same expectations with people, and he said, I tell people that other than catching a steelhead with your bare hands, swinging a fly is the hardest way to catch them. So you got to get these expectations, and the reality check in place of what you're trying to go after.
Yep.
And, and to be honest with you, guys that are fly fishing, that are primarily fly fishing, they understand that. And they understand how hard it is to get one swinging a fly, coming from the other range of people that are, maybe bobber fishing or maybe back trolling or, bait fishing, stuff like that. There's a little learning curve there as far as the time it takes to actually get one hooked up.
Yeah, for sure. And this year has been kind of extra tough, right, on the kilickitat. I mean, the numbers have been down and things like that. Do you have, I'm not sure, talking about 0 fish days, I guess that's part of the expectations. But, when you have those situations, how does, how do you deal with that? And how do you make it a good trip when you do have situations where maybe they, the catching falls even below, some of that.
Again, that comes back, and this was a learning curve for me in the beginning, setting those expectations to where you may not get a fish. That's just the reality. And I talk to people about, when we're going out, we're going to control only the things that we can control. And you can never control whether or not that steelhead goes and grabs your fly, or grabs your whatever you're fishing with. The things that I can control as a guide are my effort and my attitude towards you, as far as we're basically friends, coming together and we're fishing, and I'm just showing you how to do what I've been doing. And so I can keep that in control. I can control my effort. I can, work as hard as you want me to work. We fish as hard as you want to fish. And then, put the fly in the spots that we think are fish. Their fish are going to be there, and to let the rest take care of itself, Yep.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree. I think that, and that's the take-home message that, from the guides that I've interviewed. I think that, that expectation, understanding that, and actually Scott McGarva, I had him on episode 17 at wetflyswing.com/17. Gosh, it was great listening to him, talk about it, because he basically said the same thing, and that, that guy that's beating his chest, he's working up on the lodges up and, on the Bulkley and stuff. And, he's like, the guy beating his chest coming in after the end of the day because he caught, a dozen fish or something on his wet fly versus, the guy that didn't catch quite as many, but he caught him on a dry fly, but had a great day.
Yep.
That's it. It's just the experience. So I think that's basically what you're saying as well.
And to add to that too, I think is a huge thing that when I teach people or they're beginners, in fly fishing, or beginners in any type of fishing, but mostly fly fishing, is you have to love the process. You have to absolutely be in love with the process of doing what you're doing, because if it's only about, the end goal, like, you're going to be disappointed every time. You're going to be disappointed, if you have to love learning how to do different casts. You have to love how to, like, feel your way through a river. You have to love how to, the act of, like, hunting down the river and to try to find these fish, because if it's the hookup, when you do get a fish and you get it to the bank, the amount of time that it takes to get that fish hooked and in and on the bank is like, it's a tiny, tiny amount in the big scope of all of your fishing adventures. You know what I mean? And so it can't only be about that, because if it is, you're going to go home disappointed almost every time.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a great point. So you mentioned casting. What your experience transitioning from single-handed cast to spey casting? Maybe you can explain what that was like and that whole process. Yeah.
So I am a person that thinks I need to figure everything out myself, right? And so instead of, going, and when I made the transition into two-handed rods, I did it because on the kilickitat, I like to swing flies. And even when I was doing single-handed, I was swinging flies. And so after it flooded a handful, 10 plus years ago now, it was the gravel bars and everything were nice and buried. It was clean, and you could do quite a bit of casts. And, in the last handful of years, the growth up on the banks has just been outrageous, and the trees and the brush and everything is really tall in a lot of spots. And so I was having a lot of trouble, with which most people do, with a single-handed rod and not the right equipment for what you're trying to do. And so I got into the two-handed game because I was seeing guys out there being able to cast quite a ways and cover a lot of water with minimal back cast. And then that two-handed game kind of turned me into learning way more about the lines and all the equipment needed to kind of do what I was doing with the swinging thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so the transition happened. I got a two-handed rod, and then I honestly watched YouTube videos, and I went out and I practiced. And I didn't get an instructor, or I didn't have anybody even around where I live that I knew that could help me out with that. So I watched videos, and I went out and I put in the time. I live right up here in Tri-Cities by the Columbia River, and so there's some spots up on the Columbia where I could get out where the current's moving enough up by the Hanford Reach, and have enough current to swing through there. And I spent hours in January when it was freezing cold and casted. And really, the cast that was easy for me to learn was, because I'm right-handed, it was the snap tee, and it was just because all of my practice happened with the river moving to the left. And so it was the easiest cast for me to control and get going out instead of going off my opposite shoulder. So that's kind of the snap tee with the right-handed is the one that I learned how first. And then, really I practiced that, then got to the kilickitat, and then realized, I'm going to probably need a couple different casts when that river's going the other way, or if the wind's blowing, or for something like that, you know what I mean? And so then I started to kind of piece my way into finding some different casts, getting some different books, and digging into the different types of casts like that. But one thing that I actually has really, really helped me understand, like, the mechanics of the casting and what to do and anchor placement and all of that stuff has been putting commando heads on my trout rods, on my 5 and 6 weight rods, because it's a lot easier. It was a lot easier for me to see what my rod path and things were doing with a single-handed rod, a little short one, still shoot it out the same way. And so I was able to go into, a pond or somewhere that I didn't need a big, long spey rod. I could go out and play around with different types of casts and see what they were doing and kind of get the muscle memory of doing that cast, and then I would transition into my bigger rod.
That's cool. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've I chatted with Matt Clara, who broke down a little bit of the trout spay and kind of the micro spay stuff. And I think I might, it sounds like a lot of people are definitely doing that for trout, and it's partly that it's like, they're getting a break, but they still love the spay. And I think I might have to. I got the salmon fly trip coming up here, and I think I might have to get myself a little micro or something small I can use.
It's super fun.
Yeah. Plus out there you're tossing some big heavy stuff too. So. Nice. Definitely. So, that's interesting, man. You're up on the Hanford Reach. That's quite a You got quite a little dump site next door to you.
Yeah, just to say the least.
Yeah.
It's a little crazy.
Yeah,
but,
for those that don't know, the Hanford Reach is the most radioactive site in the country.
Yep.
Maybe something like that. I mean, it's basically all the nuclear weapons, everything that was used to create the bombs, the atomic bombs were created there, and then all the nuclear waste was basically stored there underground.
Yep. So trying to take care of the waste that's out there. A lot of people work there.
That's crazy. We get actually on this show, I don't get into conservation much, and that's partly because I'm trying to provide, just really go into the tips, and people have said, there's lots of conservation shows and groups out there, but this is obviously one that. In that area, it's your next door neighbor. It's definitely probably on top of mine quite a bit.
Yeah,
but,
and you can get way into that. But like I said, that could be a whole two conversations. Different conversations.
Yeah, we'll leave that. We'll leave that for maybe if I do another show.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's good. I love the casting stuff. I've had people that have talked in detail about casting tips and things like that. It's not easy, and in fact, I'm going to be going out this week with with kind of an instructor to look at, look at what I'm doing, some things I can do better as well. So that's probably that's a good tip. I think that for anybody who can find somebody they can then help, because I did the same thing. I taught myself with videos, and I think I kind of have some bad habits from it. But no, that's good. Good to hear. So you're out there teaching people. I mean, when you get a beginner that comes to you, you're going through the steps and teaching him how to cast and all that?
Yep. Yeah, and it's really, when I get beginners coming to me, it's really again, back to those clear expectations, they have to really outline and tell me what they're trying to get out of the trip or the individual lesson or whatever we're doing, because I do lessons with people and classes and things like that, but it's really, if they just want to focus on getting a cast down, then that's what we do. You know what I mean? I put them in the spots where the river is conducive to a certain type of cast that they're trying to learn, or the easiest cast for them to get going, just to get the fly out in an area that they can have a chance to catch a fish. So I go from very, very beginning, and it's not the thing that's cool that I talk to beginners about is I'm not a master caster. I'm not like a certified teacher or instructor or anything like that, but I'm going to show you how to get the fly out where it needs to be. It may not be the prettiest thing. It may not be, technically sound every single time. Yeah. But the whole point is getting it out there where the fish can see it. And so, and people like that, where you're not getting too technical with things. And I guess that's why, my teaching background kind of helps with that. And so I don't have a tendency to, overwhelm people with a lot of information in an area where they're unknown. They don't know a lot about, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I hear you. And I had Peter Humphreys on episode 7, and he went into detail on some of just the whole process and some tips on, how you can do a better cast. So if you want to check that out, folks can go listen to that one. That was a great one. In fact, Pete he's a good all around guy. So it was a fun episode to do. But now, transitioning into more of the actual fishing, I guess quickly as far as gear, so rod, reel, line, what do you recommend for I guess winter fishing, or did you do more winter or summer fishing? No, summer fishing, because the kilickitat really it goes from June to November, and so it's a summer fishery. For the summer, if I'm just gonna talk about that one just because that's where my experience goes in. Switch rods are the best in my experience. Anything from 11 to 12 foot range. I think you have way more control over a shorter rod, than you do with a 13.5 foot. I do have longer rods that I fish there too, just because those were, that was one of the first ones that I got a Reddington Dooley. Sure.
was 13'6", 8 weight was the very first rod I got, and so I think it's way too much rod for the river now, but it was good to learn on, But if I'm going to recommend something, it's going to be somewhere in the switch rod range, just because it's a smaller river. The Kilickitat's smaller, and you can take a switch rod and cast, across the river in most of the spots if you need to, and you're really not casting that far anyway.
Yeah.
Lines, I'm a huge fan of the commando heads from OPST. I have casted some of the Skagit iFlight, and the Skagit Max is what I had on my dually the first time around, and something just about the commando head, I love the way it shot out, and I loved how easy it was for beginners and my wife learning how to fly fish to cast right away. So I have commando heads and their laser running lines on all my stuff, and as far as sink tips and stuff go, I use a lot of floating tips, and in the summertime, T11 is usually about the heaviest I go on a tip. I do have some heavier ones that there's a few spots that either the surface current's pretty fast or it's pretty deep, and I'll throw a heavier tip on, and I'll throw like an intermediate shooting head on there, but that's very specific to only a couple spots on there, but most of it's smaller gear. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So in the length of that switch rod,
anywhere between like 11 and 12 feet, somewhere around that range. I honestly, I would like to stay if I'm getting brand new rods, if I'm getting a whole bunch of brand new rods for just the Kilickitat, I would stay sub 12 foot on everything. Just because it's so easy to control, and that's the appropriate size for the river and the fish that you're fishing for.
Gotcha. Cool. And so as far as I was just thinking about some of the other guides on the river, and this is, I guess I can't remember who the conversation I had, but we were just talking about connecting with other guides. Have you been able to? I mean, are there a lot of guides on that river, or do you know all of them? Or
I don't know all of them. It's funny because growing up fishing on there, like my family and we just kind of did our thing. We'd go up there and camp almost every weekend, way up in the upper river, where there's less pressure. My dad always. He's a construction guy, and so going fishing and stuff was getting away from work. So we weren't combat fishing with people, you know what I mean? We were trying to get away from everything. And so, I spent the majority of my fishing career trying to get away from people and just be by myself. And so, just in the last year starting to guide, you see a lot more guides, fly fishing guides starting in September, obviously, because the fish are there and the water's going to be cleaner. It doesn't have the chance to get muddy from being too hot. But I don't really know. I see guys, but I don't know them personally, just because that's not what I've been able to do yet.
And I was kind of going towards, again, I've interviewed a lot of people talking about guiding and things like that. And, I haven't had, everybody on yet, but one of the take home messages, I can't remember who it was, but somebody was talking about the fact that, there's a new guide on the river, and, hadn't really connected with the old guide, right? The old guys, and they're, and that's one of those things where, I think it was I think it might have been April's podcast again, but yeah, that's one of those things where it might be a good tip, for other guides out there, and, for you or whoever, that it's a good thing to, if you haven't met those guides, just, call them up, connect with them, whatever, just to be like, because I think they will appreciate it, and they've kind of laid the foundation, of years and years on the river, so I think they would appreciate it. And for me, it's kind of the same with the podcasting. I'm a little bit new to this, but I'm trying to connect with other fellow fly fishing podcasts, and it's been a lot of fun, and just making that connection and stuff, but just letting them know that you're out there, and that it's not surprising. Because I did hear something too at the show, talking to somebody, and I think somebody was like doing a GoPro on the river, and it was like, who's that guy with his GoPro filming? And the kind of, how it is, everybody has egos and stuff like that. So anyways, I'll just throw that out there, just because I know that some of the old timers would love that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. It's a weird thing with guides, and honestly, it doesn't matter the industry. That, like, it happens in a lot of different industries. you see somebody else out there, and it's like, oh my, do I say something? Do I not say something? And is he he threatening my business? And how does that? And and that's not something I'm about either. I'm not trying to take people's clients or anything like that. I have my own little niche that I want to just fill in if it's there, and just try to talk to people as friends and other people fishing on the river, because that's what it's about, and not being combative with each other. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think there's room for I think there's room for everybody. Like you said, it's no different in any niche. You're your own person, and people are going to come back for you because of you, and that's what's cool. So awesome. Yeah, those are good. A little insight. I always love hearing those experiences. Yeah. So for your website, I was looking at School of Chrome, which is I love the URL. That's definitely definitely is a good one. Well, on your site, I think I saw something there about was it a garden? Yeah, connection. Maybe you can explain a little bit about that and what that's all about.
Definitely. So School of Chrome isn't just fishing guide. It's not just guided fishing trips. It's me. It's me sharing the things that I do all the time. So it's more of you can call it an outdoor program. It says education in the outdoors. I like to garden. My wife and I, we like to garden. We like to can. We like to ferment, kimchi and sauerkraut. My wife makes kombucha. We like to do a lot of things like that in our house and around we just have a little place in town or whatever, but the things that make us feel good. So cool. What makes me feel good is being able to share that stuff with people, whether it's fishing, whether it's tying flies, whether it's helping people get a little garden going, because what I've found is there's a lot of people, not just with the gardening stuff or with the fishing stuff, the tying flies, when people want to get started in stuff like that, they truly want to play around with that because they think it's fun. And it's so overwhelming in any of that. You go walk into a fly shop, or you walk into, a nursery, and you see 10,000 things, and you don't know where to get started, and you spend a ton of money, and then it doesn't work out because you don't really have a plan, or you don't really know what you're doing. And my wife and I, we went through both on the gardening and the fishing thing, not having people help us. So it's just been trial and error for years and years and years. And so I'm just with that, just trying to share my knowledge from my trials and errors of how to grow your own food and preserve it, and just be more connected with what you're eating and what you're doing.
Awesome. That's awesome. No, I love that. I think it's really cool. I think, and another thing that kind of separates you from other people out there and stuff. And I think it's all we're connected. We should all be trying to do more of the eating locally and growing our own. And for sure, that's cool. Yep. Just interested in that. Yeah. What's a as far as resources or books, magazines, things like that? Is there something that some of your favorites that you read or watch or listen to?
Oh man. As far as the podcasts go, I go into, I think everybody does too. You get into waves of, you get, for a while you get into, I'm just listening to podcasts all the time. And then I get into reading books all the time. And, it just kind of depending on what you're feeling. I started listening to, this has been a few years back, but April Vokey's podcast, the Orvis Fly Fishing podcast, and picking through some of those ones. I actually listen to a lot of business podcasts and a lot of, podcasts just about being happy in life, sure. And how to go about that kind of thing, and not, because I think that translates into the work that you're doing, as opposed to the other way where you're just doing a lot of work or research into the work and then backwards. I don't know if that makes sense or not. I think if you're working on yourself, then that projects outward into all of the work that you do. Exactly. You know what I mean? Oh yeah. As far as books goes and stuff, I have like Greg Senyo's Fusion Fly Tying, and the one from Jade Nicholas that was, I don't know if it's the modern Steelhead flies. Yep. I like those. I think I was telling you at the show, I don't tie specific patterns. I don't follow step-by-step patterns, but I love to look at other people's stuff just to take inspiration from either color combinations or shapes or materials. And I just love, filtering through those books and seeing what other people are doing, Same thing on Instagram. I don't post a ton on Instagram. I go in waves with that too. Mm-hmm. Same thing, Instagram and Facebook. I go in waves in whether or not I want to post stuff. But I do like to look at OPST, Jonathan Farmer is one of the guys. I think it's Midnight Custom Flies is his business, and he does a lot of really cool stuff as far as tying flies. But I don't have specific books and resources like that I keep going back to. Yeah. I like to dabble around into as much of the different stuff as I can.
Sure. So yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I was listening to. I'm totally addicted to the podcasting too. That's part of the reason I got this whole thing going. But I was listening to. I think it's the Fly Fishing Tapes podcast.
Okay.
And it's just really interesting because you hear these shows, and I talked to Jason. He's the host there, and the most recent one I listened to, it was I wish I could remember the name, but I think it was Jay was talking about the. This really crazy thing they had that I hadn't even heard about, this Pig Farm Inc. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. Yeah, it's crazy. Exactly. So I'm going to follow up and find out, but it's just really, there's so many cool things going on out there in fly fishing. Like the river runs through it, right? It was this big thing back in the 90s, right? And then fly fishing was slowly declining or leveling out. Well, at Pig Farm Inc., they're basically trying to just connect people and have more fun with fly fishing. So they're going out to these places like bars and stuff around the country, and they are basically teaching random people how to tie flies.
That's cool.
Yeah, and at the same time, they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff like tattooing each other, and it's kind of crazy. But so, anyways, I just listened to that last night. So, anybody wants to check that, I'll provide a link in the show notes here. This one, let's see. Gosh, I didn't even put our episode number up for this one. I believe. Well, you can go to wetflyswing.com/show, and we'll be able to search for Duran Torrez to find this episode. But yeah, no, it's pretty cool, man. I think there's a lot of people out there doing some great stuff, along with yourself. You're in the guiding and you're kind of new to this, so I like what you have going with the gardening and stuff like that. It's really cool.
Cool.
So what do you think? You have a good kind of a crazy fishing story for us to... Or maybe not crazy, just something interesting, maybe something that connects us to how you got to where you are and maybe a turning point?
It's not, I guess there wouldn't be... Okay, I'll tell you a story. It's it probably doesn't, my buddy's going to love me for this one.
Sweet.
But it doesn't really... It doesn't have any kind of like connection to where I'm at or why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's just kind of a fun story it's about fly fishing. So it's been a few years ago, and my buddy getting into fly fishing. He's in the area of catching a lot of trout, right? Just wanting to catch a lot of trout. And so he has a 6-weight rod, 5 or 6 weight rod, and he just had like a little stimulator on or something like that. And he's fishing this tiny little pool where it's only trout are going to be there, and he's trying to catch these trout, and I'm over there standing by him. And then all of a sudden he's like, "Hey, I got one. I got a big one." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." So I go over there, and I see this steelhead come up, and the steelhead, and this water, it couldn't have been more than 2 feet deep, and it's clear. And I see this fish in there, and this fish had came up, and he'd watched it come to the top and grab his stimulator and go back down, right? And it's at the head of and it's kind of hard to explain in this little trough, but anyway, it's like at the head of these rapids, but it's in a little trough where it's kind of calm, right? And so he's like, "Oh man, what do I do? What do I do?" And I said, "Just let him run if he's going to run." And when I said that, the fish turns and takes off running, and he goes and he puts his left hand on his reel and just pinches down as tight as he could go, and it just goes pop. Yep. And that was the first and only steelhead so far that he's hooked on his fly rod.
Oh man!
But I guess the point of that is, we still talk about it. It's been a few years ago, and I'm not ever gonna forget it. But it's just one of those things how a fish can just get you into a a state of mind that you're almost out of control. Like you don't know what you're doing. You know what I mean? And how it can stick with you like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of little things like that, but it's just, about the process is about how doing what you're doing like that and fishing can just get you going. So
those the lost fish stores. I mean, you pretty much don't forget that one at all until you get the hook into the next one.
I know, right?
Because it's tough, especially those one we've all had them if you've hooked into some fish. Cool. So, do you have a couple? I know you mentioned you don't do any specific patterns, but do you have any? If you had to say a couple of pattern types or things that you use most often?
Definitely. So I'm in the process right now of kind of refilling my box just for the summer fish. You know what I mean? I like tying winter flies, just for the fun of tying them. I don't fish winter enough to have as many as I have, but I just like tying them. But as far as summer goes, there's a couple general patterns that, I mean, they're not rocket science. They're going to be intruder style patterns, but maybe 2.5 inches long at most. You know what I mean? They still have dumbbell eyes, but these are about the smallest dumbbell eyes you can find. Just little tiny. They don't even have weight. They're just meant to, for some looks and maybe a little bit of keel to keep your fly going straight. But just intruder patterns in small intruder patterns in black, reddish, purple, like the darker kind of tone, kind of colors like that. And then the other ones I have are in white tones, mostly white with a few accents of, red or purple or something like that. So there's the intruder pattern there. Then I have kind of just a muddler minnow style pattern, not the traditional one, but a tied on a shank, with some hackles coming out or just rubber legs or some different things to add a little bit of movement, but basically in natural. And I tie the ones I like the best are tied with moose hair. It's a little bit firmer. It's kind of a tough hair, but get it in the darker color, so it's not the like your standard deer hair kind of colored look. It's a little bit darker.
Okay.
So that intruder one, that muddler one, and then the other one are just your string leeches. You know what I mean? Anything in a leechy looking swimming tied with some kind of braid, Power Pro onto the rabbit strip back there. And again, those ones are in the black, dark, black purplish with accent colors and in white. So
cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And going back to that podcasting thing, you mentioned a business podcast or something you listen to. Do you have one that's one of your favorites?
Oh man. Entree Leadership through the Dave Ramsey business thing, the Entree Leadership podcast. Okay. Anybody that's wanting to either start a business or that's in business or any of that, it's just there's tons of information and then tons of resources. That one's been huge.
Nice.
For me as far as learning and growing through that.
Awesome. And how do you find clients for your business?
Initially, word of mouth. I do have, I put some stuff out there on social media. I'm not a huge social media person. I don't put a lot of stuff out there, and I don't like trying to sell a bunch of stuff on social media. You know what I mean? Yep. So it's not like I'm trying to just always have something to sell on there. So initially, a lot of word of mouth, just because a lot of people knew me, growing up and that I fish and things like that. But then slowly through sportsman shows and through my wife is a hairstylist, and so there's a lot of women that get their hair done that their husbands like to fish too. But I like to get people through. And then I have random ones that just find my website and stuff from around here. But I like to get clients through like a sportsman show, and I'll do a farmer's market here in Tri-Cities through talking to people. You know what I mean? Because I've had people call me up that want a fishing trip, but not knowing me or not having a conversation or anything with me yet. They don't know the expectation of what's probably got to happen on the trip. You know what I mean? Yeah. So being able to talk to somebody face to face, is kind of how I do that.
Gotcha.
But I like doing it the best.
Yeah. Cool. And so what do you think? We've talked a little bit about what you've learned, things like that over the years, and, to put you where you're, I mean, you had experience gear fishing, which I think is common for a lot of people getting started because you get a lot of connection with the fish. Do you have a tip for maybe you can give us a good steelhead tip and then a tip for a new guide that's trying to get going in the industry?
Like as far as the steelhead, just for like fly fishing?
Yeah, if you thought of one thing, person's trying to get their first fish, maybe something that might help them or something that you tell your clients to help them.
Okay. So I would tell them, pick a fly that you absolutely love. Okay. Yeah. And because the fly that you absolutely love is the one that you're going to fish with the most confidence and you're going to fish all the time. And then, I would tell them to fish closer to the bank than you think. Mm-hmm. And this is strictly on the kilickitat, and I know it translates to a lot of other rivers because steelhead are steelhead. Yep. But don't think you need to cast all the way across the river, because most of the fish that I catch, especially when the water gets colored, they're really close to the bank. So it's okay if your cast flops out there 25 feet. Let it swing through and see what happens.
Yep.
So that would be a fly fishing tip, I guess.
Yeah.
What was the other one?
That's a good one for sure. The other one was so if it's more specifically for a new guide who wants to get into it, a tip to maybe something to help him get started.
Definitely. So as far as a new guide goes, I would say the biggest tip that I can give you is figure out your why. You have to figure out truly why you are doing what you're doing, because it can't be about money. None of this stuff can be about money, because if it is, it's over. It's over. I truly believe, money and other things. There's okay. I guess let me back up. With that, finding your why, you have to define for yourself what success is. Mm-hmm. Because success to me doesn't necessarily mean money. It definitely doesn't just mean money. So really defining what it is for you to be successful, so that you're not disappointed when you don't get as many clients as you think you're going to, or you go that first time and you fish for 12 hours and you don't get a bite. Mm-hmm. You really have to define why you're doing it and what a success is to you, and make sure they're not money, or they're not numbers of fish.
Perfect.
So
yeah, that's awesome. I think that's the perfect way to put that. So as far as success, we talked a little bit about this, but for your client on a trip, how do you define success for them?
I define success for them based on what they want out of the trip. Like I said, I try to bring as much education into my trips as possible. And so success to me is, I heard this quote somewhere and I can't remember where it was at, but it said something to the fact that, steelhead fishing is fishing good water well, right? Mm-hmm. And so success to me is putting your fly in a spot that you have a chance to catch a fish, and let the chips fall where they may. Yep. You can't control anything else. And if you fish the kilickitat River is beautiful going down the canyon, and if you fish for 12 hours and you have the chance to catch a fish in every spot, that's successful, because you got away from your daily work grind, or you got where you don't have cell phone service, or whatever your why is. Everybody has a different why of why they're going fishing, but it's really that. It's the opportunity. Success is having the opportunity to do whatever you're going to do.
Nice. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. How do you have a good perspective on some of this? Some of the answers here to these questions have been really good. What's your when you look at the next 20 or 30 or 40 years or whatever, and then you connect that to the history of fly fishing, where do you see yourself? At the end of the day, what would you like to be, I don't know, either remembered for, or just your connection to the, the fly fishing?
I guess I see myself as just another person. I see myself as another person that likes to fly fish and likes to fish in general. I would like to be viewed maybe as an inspiration in terms of this guy stopped what he was doing that was a quote unquote secure job in public education and did something that was
you were a principal, right?
Yeah, a vice principal, not a full on principal, but assistant principal. Yeah, and so stopped that whole thing and went to do something that was, definitely not normal as far as being 30 years old and having a wife and a kid kind of thing. So honestly, it doesn't even have to be specific into the fly fishing, but being remembered as you can do what you want to do, and it's scary, and it takes some effort, and it takes some support from your family and the people around you, but don't think you have to be trapped into something for reasons that aren't real. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
It just takes some effort.
It does, for sure. Well, that's quite you're right. I mean, you had a secure job, and I mean, things are changing, I think, in this day and age from what they were 20 years ago, but still, I mean, you had to jump off there. I mean, what was that experience like? Can you take us back to that moment where you were you were a secure job as probably working your way to be a principal or whatever, and then you jumped and you said, you know what, I'm going this way. What was that like?
Yeah, man. I mean, I went through all the schooling thing, got my master's, my principal cert, and did a couple years, and it was just my perspective on things, and always thinking that this was just the next progression in education. Yeah, you're a teacher. Okay, now it's time to go into administration, and you have more control over doing things, and then once I did that, it was great. Like, I love the people where I worked, and it just didn't fit with what, there was still something there that wasn't being fulfilled, or there was just something there that was still driving, and so one day, like, really just a lot of support from my wife, CJ. Like, she, if it wasn't for her encouraging me to do this and being okay with that, then I probably still would have been in education, just because I wouldn't have taken the risk. You know what I mean? Yep. So, but it was super scary. It was hard to be able to give up what people would view as secure, but really, I mean, it just depends on how you define security and how you define success. Yeah. But then once I made this decision to go the other way, it was beautiful. It was just like I'd never been happier working 15 hours in a day on doing stuff, and learning all these new things. And so, it was scary, but it was in the long run, it's good.
That's really cool. Really cool. And I guess a lot more. You probably have more freedom now, right? You're doing your own thing, and
you do. Yeah, I have a lot more freedom, and then it also, it allows me to expand in some other things, like the teaching, like fly tying and beginners fly fishing stuff and guarding stuff, and really, instead of thinking as a job and like my personal life and my work life are two separate things. Like, I used to think that way, and now there's one life. You're one life, and I think you just do the things that make you happy. And if you can keep doing those, and if you can find a way to make a living by sharing that information with other people, that's awesome. That's the way to go.
That's cool. What are your, for the next 5 or 10 years, you have some goals in place where you'd like to get your business?
Yeah. As far as goals for my business goes, I just want to get in connection with more people, and whether or not that means, if it's one new returning client every year, that's a success to me. You know what I mean? It's not about a big numbers game, because I believe in the long run, those clients that you have meaningful relationships with that come back every year, that's what it's about. You know what I mean? And to me, I'm choosing to gain, if it's one meaningful client every year for the next 10 years, that's better than getting, 50 new clients this year and having, almost none of them return and having that be a bad experience. And so it's just to grow a little bit, meet more people, and really let people know who I am and what I'm about, because I haven't really shared that out up until starting last year. So doing things like farmers market, and really just becoming more connected with my community in what I'm doing now. So that's kind of my big goal.
Cool. Yeah, I love hearing your hearing the response there because I've interviewed some guys that have guided for their entire lives, and some that, like Kevin Feenstra in episode 13, he's still guiding. He was the guy that probably was a big part of starting swinging in the Great Lakes for Steelhead, as well as like Tom Larimer. And some of those guys, well, at least like Tom and some of those folks, they guided for a good chunk of time, but eventually got into more of the rep part of the industry. So do you feel like you're good to go? I mean, I know it's early for you, but you plan on guiding for the entire time, or I guess you expect there's going to be some changes.
Yeah, I try not to look. I try to balance the planning ahead and the not worrying about things that may not come true. I'm taking every day as it is, and you know what? If 5 years from now, or if a year from now, an opportunity presents itself that I think is just a manifestation of how I'm feeling inside, that I want to share that stuff, then I'll run with it. And if not, then I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I just kind of see how things are going. I don't have specific plans of what I'm trying to get to. But I think things will pop up if you do the right work. If I keep doing the right work that I believe in, opportunities will present themselves in different ways, and then it'll just be up to me to make the choice when those things happen. Yep.
Nice. And you mentioned fly tying. Are you teaching some classes in tying, or? I
haven't officially done my first class. I've done a couple like little lessons here and there with people, but I have a bunch of classes in the works of both beginning fly tying, tying steelhead jigs, and then tying spay flies, the more advanced class. Tying a lot of steelhead jigs. I have that as a class because people over here in the Tri-Cities, they do a lot of jig fishing. Yeah. Above the dams and stuff for steelhead. It's a lot bigger thing than swinging flies for sure. But no, I have those in place, and it's just kind of I'm starting the process now of getting some venues of where I can host these things, and kind of getting that stuff in the works of working with some other businesses to try to partner up on some of that. But I see School of Chrome as being almost like a school. It's an outdoor school thing where if people, I would love to down the road, if kids out of high school, or who, it doesn't matter what age, if they want to be a fishing guide, I can be a resource to help them with the business side of it, with creating your mission and learning how to work with people and go on the river, and just kind of a resource for all of the things that I've done. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it, in the big picture of things. Yeah,
that's great. Well, we are about there.
Perfect.
Had just another question or two here. Always like to get a check in on the next 6 months or so, what you have going. Do you have anything that we can look forward to? I guess you're talking about these classes and things like that. Is that going to be coming out for people in your area?
Yes, I have. I'm just waiting on a couple yeses or nos as far as venues go to where to hold the classes. You know what I mean? And so they can be out. They can start as soon as June. Okay. Or as soon as May, honestly, if depends on in the next couple of weeks how things go. Cool. But they're in the works to go with that, and then the other thing is, just doing my farmers market thing here with gardening, and with just a lot of the bass fishing. Right now, it's just starting to warm up over here in Tri-Cities, where the smallmouth will start coming out of the Columbia and going up into the Yakima. So fly fishing for smallmouth will start to fire here soon. In the next few weeks.
Awesome. That sounds like a good deal. That is cool. So you're going to be, you got that going on, and I guess we can keep your eye. And then the best place to find you would be on schoolofchrome.com.
Yep, schoolofchrome.com is the best spot to find all of the resources about what I do. And then if you're wanting to look at Instagram as the next thing, at Duran Torrez.
Yep,
is my handle, and so that's I don't post on it a lot, but that's where you can go back and see things as far as like inspiration for flies, and as fishing gets going, then I'll start to kind of post more updates on things like that.
Perfect. Cool. Well, we covered a lot of the, like we talked at the start, kind of what it's like to get into guiding and things. I think you covered that pretty well, actually, on the things we talked about. Did I miss anything or anything else you'd put out there for somebody that's thinking about, they're on the cusp of quitting their permanent job and jumping in? Anything you'd tell that person on the edge?
Yeah, just do it, man. Just do it. Make sure you have some support, from people around you. And if you don't, then who cares?
Yeah.
If it's something that's a fire inside you that you need to do that you're going to regret, later on, then you do it.
Yep.
And just do it.
I agree. I think we're all life is short, and there's all sorts of terrible things that happen out there, and you don't want to have any regrets. So
yep.
Cool, Duran. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and I love what you have going. I think this is a different take on things, and I love the gardening and kind of that whole thing. It's really cool what you have going. So I'm going to keep up with you, and I guess I'll as well at School of Chrome kind of keep up with you there, and maybe I can get up and connect with you later at some of these classes. I've got some fly tying stuff going on as well, and always interested to hear how other people are doing it. So I'll touch base with you later on, but I wanted to thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I had a great time.
All right, good deal. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks. Bye.
All right, see ya. So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links and information we covered in today's episode, just go to wetflyswing.com/22. And please go to wetflyswing.com/community to connect with a growing Facebook group. I wanted to read one review from iTunes to show you quickly some of the good comments we're receiving over on the review page there. This is from D. Ledden Byrne on iTunes. He says, highly recommended. Tons of great information and interesting stories from people who know their waters like no one else. Thanks, D. Ledden Byrne. I really appreciate you taking the time to leave a review. And for those others want to get out there and leave an honest rating and review, you can just head on over to iTunes and check it out. Or you can go to wetflyswing.com/review, and there's a little bit of instructions to get you through the loop there. So good to connect with you all, and hope to hopefully catch up with you soon on the river or maybe online. Have a good one. Later.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.